Good morning.
Good morning.
This is John Frye, the curator of the Western Maryland Room in Washington County Free Library in Hagerstown. John, could you just give us a brief introduction to the Western Maryland Room for those who don't know it?
Basically, the Western Maryland Room contains materials about written here or published here for the counties in Maryland from Carroll County west to Garrett and the adjacent counties in the other states.
Thank you. And the reason we're interviewing you today is because you have now worked at the Washington County Free Library for 50 years. That is quite an accomplishment, and we wanted to record this moment. Could you tell us how you started with the library?
I was here hoping to set up an exhibit by an artist named Garnet Jex of Civil War material in what was then our second library. And the director at that time, Ed Hall, came out and talked to us, said he wanted to open the Western Maryland Room, which they at that time called the Maryland Room, and that he had tried it with volunteers. It didn't work. Did I know anyone that might do it if there was pay involved? And it was about 3 hours a week, I think, on Saturday. I didn't work on Saturday. Another job was available, and said, well, I'll give it a try. I think the pay was like $2.10 an hour, but it was payable, and that's how we opened the room.
And from there?
Well, from there, the first thing I remember he told me to do, he said, we do not want to be a Maryland room. But, we're not worried about covering the Southern Maryland, Eastern Shore, or the Bay Area. So how about just being Western Maryland? And I thought that sounded like a good idea. So he had me weed out a few materials that were here relative to the other portion of Maryland and keep what was basically in the Western Maryland area, which was very, very little, and that's how we began the collection.
And in your 50 years of work here, how have you seen the collection grow?
Well, at that time, I suppose till I pulled out the non-Western Maryland books, we were probably down to like 150 to 100 books, and that was it. No vertical file, no photographs. Basically, Williams History of Washington County.
And Scharf as well, correct?
Oh yeah, Scharf was here too, yeah.
Okay. And where has this incredible collection of Western Maryland material come from?
Well, he did say that what came in or what went out would be up to me, and so I began to watch all sources. And at that time, there were a lot of sources that were available. Historical groups were selling their historical collections, and I got onto the mailing list and watched what might be available and would bid on it if it were available. And many times we did get the product, so that's how we began to up the collection from on the rare material, and then we carefully watched anything that would be coming out as a new publication, either about or written by someone here. So that's how we began, and I suppose now we probably have close to 15,000 manuscripts, books, and that doesn't count the vertical file material.
And family histories?
Yeah, one of the things he did tell me is we do not want the Western Maryland Room to be a genealogical library, and prior to that time there was nothing in the room relating to genealogy. I knew that one of the uses of the room would be family research, and so I started using the words family research instead of genealogy, and quietly began to collect books that would have been used by persons doing genealogy. So that's how we did get into the genealogy status, but we still are not a genealogical library. We have a lot of material available for family researchers to use. We do not buy genealogies. If someone will give us one, we'll take it. We still only buy source materials for genealogy.
Okay. So what is your pride and joy in the collection? What is your most used item?
Well, it's hard to peg an item that would be most used. You categorize it. Certainly family research would be 25 to 30% of our use. Civil War here, of course, is a big use. It would be next, and most people don't realize it, but high school yearbooks would be the third most used item we have, I think.
Tell us more about the high school yearbooks. Why are they interested?
Well, first and foremost, even today, a high school yearbook is very expensive. And there's a lot of folks that can't afford their high school ring or can't afford to buy a yearbook. So as they get older, they begin to relate to when they were in high school and do not have a book of their own, so they'll come out and use our collection. And they're used for, we've even had folks use them to find our heritage. Say someone was adopted and didn't know their real parents. Sometimes they'll use the yearbooks as a source.
And where do you have yearbooks from?
We basically try to hold it to Washington County instead of going into the surrounding areas, because if you did that, you'd have a complete full library of yearbooks. So the seven high schools in the county. So what, I don't know where. But anyway, just county high schools mostly.
And going back to the early 20s?
Well, very few of the schools go back that far. Prior to Hagerstown High School, there was a Washington County High School. That's the oldest we would have in yearbook-wise, and I think the oldest Washington County high school yearbook we have is probably 1915.
And you're up to date? You're all the way through to last year?
Well, yes and no. We had subscribed to all the high school yearbooks, but the persons in charge never really did get them to us. So in a lot of cases, we have to wait till they come in from other means. Williamsport is the only high school that really has provided a yearbook every year. So we may not be current, and we may be a couple years before we do get specific years in.
Let's moving to your family, your Civil War collection. Do you have a great deal of material on Antietam that is unique to this area?
We do not have material relative to Antietam that really has not been published. Most of our material has been published. Original sources such as diaries and photographs and letters home, because this library never collected that until we opened the Western Maryland Room in 1968. This library missed out on an awful lot of good material that may have been placed here, but it was not receiving that type of material. So as far as original material goes on Antietam, we really have very little. We have all the published works that have come out on that battle, also the Battle of South Mountain, and the Harper's Ferry campaign in '62. The big thing we do have is we have all of the major sources for Civil War research, such as the official records, both the originals and the edition, Southern Historical Society magazine, Molus, Confederate Veteran. We have copies of those available for the Civil War researcher. Of course, a lot of Antietam material in there.
And then the other large collection that you would have would be the C&O Canal?
Yes, there again, because of not collecting, the library missed out on a lot of original material. So basically, what we have has either come through donations or material we've picked up since 1968. So there was no C&O Canal file prior to 68. There was no Antietam file prior to 68.
So do you have anything unique in the C&O collection?
I don't think anything that you wouldn't find in the Canal headquarters or National Park Service or Library of Congress or archives. So no, nothing exceedingly unique on the C&O or Civil War.
But every time I come in here, you have loads of people in, researching, digging through files. What is your principal use for patrons?
Well, the big thing is subject, of course. It can be anything from an individual, like a gentleman yesterday come in and said, "What do you have on Frisbee Tillman?" Prominent 1800s man in this county. So it can go from an individual to railroading or, of course, various wars, manufacturing. We have all those categories, and so the response would be, well, what's the question?
Okay. Are you finding researchers broader in their interest or narrower in their interest in the last 50 years?
Much broader because of the internet. No question about that. Not only with original materials, but they can research on the internet, pick up sources, materials, ideas before they come in. So they're much broader.
So they're more informed than they used to be?
Oh yes. Yeah, because more information available. Yeah.
So how has the library changed in the 50 years?
Ooh, boy, that's been the big change. We've gone from a 19th century type library to 21st century in my time here, and it's when I came here in '68, the library was still run as it was when Miss Titcomb started the library in 1901. And once the internet hit, that changed everything. To your pleasure.
And the patrons, are they very different from the previous generations?
In questions, no. But in the knowledge how to use, yes. In fact, a lot of times, as you well know, there are patrons that know a lot more than I do on how to assess and get to various sources of information. So the patron is much more further advanced usually, but that's not always. You will have someone walk in, I'm just starting, and they have not done anything. So then you're back to the 19th century.
The other question, what about characters in the library staff? Have they changed over the years? And can you give us some of the fun people you worked with in the past?
This library has always had an excellent staff, and it does yet today. In fact, it's amazed me at the patience and time that our staff will put in with a silly question, which to me I would not spend a lot of time with, but trained librarians are trained to do that, and they do that. And our staff here has always been, I think, above par when it comes to aiding the public, and that continues today.
Tell us about some of the leadership of the library. Some of your former directors. Leadership
has always been good. Especially the directors, including our current director with me, although they wish to be informed of what's going on, they're not hands-on. And so basically they've left me making decisions relative to what goes in the room, what doesn't come in, how it's displayed, how it's made available. Of course, all of our books are cataloged and on our standard library catalog. So every book we have, there's a WMR in front of our catalog. It's in here, has to be used in the library, but our book collection is completely cataloged and integrated into the library's book collection. So basically, it's hard to say what the difference would be there. I can't say it's easier to find by computer than it was by the old card catalog, but we better not get into that.
And do you have people from out of state or out of country coming into the Western Maryland
room?
Room?
Oh yes, we've had people not only out of state, but like you say, out of country. Australia, Canada especially, where you have other English-speaking folks. But occasionally, due to the fact that Volvo is here, we have Swedish folks come in. And a couple weeks ago, I had a gentleman from Italy visiting his family here, and just came in to look over the library and talk about it. Apologized for his English, but his English was very good.
You've received quite a few accolades for your encyclopedic knowledge. Have you done any writing on Washington County history?
No, I'm too lazy to actually put together documents on paper. As far as knowledge goes, when I took this part-time job, which is still a part-time job, I was in charge of the county map department, and had done that since 1955. So that's history also. So having the ability and opportunity to research through courthouse records, deeds, mortgages, and so forth, and court records, plus my interest in history really gave me a background to have a knowledge that very few people would have because of work experience.
And your grandfather, can you talk about him briefly?
The grandfather that ran the mill?
The grandfather that took you to the CNO?
Oh, God, yeah. Okay, well, I've been a canal buff all my life, and people always wondered how in the world you get interested in canals. Well, when I was young, Granddad used to take me fishing, and of course we were along the Potomac River, and just behind us was the old CNO Canal. He remembered the canal. He'd talk about the boats and the mules and the boat horns and going through the locks, and it sort of piqued my interest in the old way of transportation prior to the modern internal combustion engine. And so that's how I really did get interested in canals, and have carried that through my life. My wife and I have visited canals all over Canada and the United States. Basically the original canal, the mule or horse-drawn towpath canals.
Okay. Anything else, John, that people should know about the Western Maryland Room, but more importantly about you?
Well, I don't know about me, but the Western Maryland Room is open Tuesday right now, Tuesday through Saturday. I have a very capable archivist on the staff by the name of Elizabeth Howell, who has really been a great asset to the room because of her archive training. So I'd say we're going strong. We are averaging roughly 10 patrons a day. Fortunately, we are not governed by the amount of questions that we get like the rest of the library system is, or how much circulation we have. We could have one person in here basically researching all day. So That's the patron we gear to. That's what they've let us do, and that's what we're still doing.
And the talks that you've had for now 40 years, is that correct? The Macaulay lectures?
The Macaulay lectures date back, I think, to 71, I'm not sure, but the early 70s, where we have 6 historic lectures during the so-called winter months, October through April, here at the library. And we were able to do that because of a grant from late Robert Macaulay, who was an attorney here in town, left some money for history. And so we have a lecture series that goes each year, October through April, once a month.
And is very popular.
Yeah, we are pulling now anywhere from 75 patrons up for those lectures, which is very good considering the fact that we're not an organized group. That's just the public coming in.
So what do you see in the next 50 years in this library?
Well, with the internet being available, I see more of the material being digitized, so it can be used anywhere in the world, which is certainly a tremendous extent over what it was when we opened up, when the only way you could use it was come here. We have a lot of material that could be digitized that would be usable by the worldwide usage. And so that getting that material available through digitizing, plus being a repository to keep historic material, which you'll have the basic item here. That I think is the direction that it will go. I do think that there will always be some personal usage of a room like this, no matter how much material goes on the internet. We never know what kind of question we're going to get. We never know what kind of public person we're going to work with. It could be anywhere from the President of the United States to one of these people that slept last night out on the street. We work for all of them. So it to me, it's not. Sure, the individual is doing their job, and the individual is not gaining anything personally from it. But we're a service just like doctors and lawyers. And so we'll fade, we're gone. But what we do won't. In the same way, what you have put on the internet is there long after you're gone. People will be using that. They're not going to know Jill Craig did it, nor are they going to know that what I did here. Somebody else is going to come along. Hopefully we'll continue to do what we do. But it basically is not about the individual. I don't care how important Donald Trump thinks he is. It's not about Donald Trump. It's being president of the United States is what matters. And he will not be judged because he's Donald Trump. Thank goodness. He's going to be judged because of what he does as president of the United States. So it's not about us. And even though there are a lot of people that think it's about them, it is not. Don't care what you do. People that write for the paper. Right now there are big shots. People you read by so-and-so. 20 years from now, somebody reads that name, that who wrote it won't mean a thing. It's what they wrote that counts. And so that's why I can't. Sure, I'm lucky to have lived to be here 50 years. A lot of people don't live that long. But it's not about, and never has been about, John Frye. I don't think. And so it's hard to. Sure, you can go in your personal life, you can go into your kids, you can go in your family, what's your family doing, and that's good. I'm proud of my family. My family's done very well. Clear on down to the great grandchildren. Yeah, and they're doing well. But it's still individually, each one of those persons has to do their own thing, find their own niche, decide what they want to do for humanity. And even though they may think it's for themselves, it's not.
That's profound.
So that really, I've never written anything.
Mm-hmm.
I can write. I'm a pretty good writer, really. But I just never had the inspiration to sit down and write a book. I did a lot of writing when I was a correspondent with the paper, but that's current, and the next day, that's history.
Mm.
The thing about newspapers, that newspaper laying there, which was yesterday's newspaper, is now history. So the one reason why I really have never written is that I'm so precise in everything being correct that I would double, triple, quadruple check every fact, even though in my mind I knew it was right. I'd still backtrack to make sure that what I knew was right. And it's like if you're doing a tour and you have a group of people and you say something incorrect, it stops right there. Somebody may or may not remember it. You put it down and it's incorrect. It's there forever. And I used to have a talk, and I did facts and myths, and I pulled out stuff here that people have in books that are completely incorrect. And in fact, I used to start off with that big brochure that Williamsport used to put out, site of the U.S. Capitol. It never was the site of the Capitol. It was suggested it might be a possibility for a site. And so I used to pull that out and show it to them right away. You talk about fact and myth, here's a myth right off the bat that people are going to pick up things as fact. So because I've been very critical of a lot of stuff that's been written, I've shot myself down for writing it. So, and even if somebody asks a question, and I'd give an answer, and I said, no, that's the way I remember it. It's the way I think I've read it. But if you're going to write about it, you better go check it out to make sure that that is the way. Now, things that happen that you can check on, like when the guy did a book on Boots Popburger, and he wanted to quote where I had seen Boots get knocked out on the box in a little semi-pro game here. That you can't verify. And I used to often wonder, did I see that or did I imagine that? And then I talked to somebody who had an old grandmother who lived across the tracks there at Gaplin, and one day I mentioned to him, said, yep, you did, because my grandmother was sitting over on the porch, and she wondered why that guy was sitting over there on the railroad trestle in a baseball uniform. It was Boots Popburger. They knocked him out.
Confirmation.
Yeah, right. But in my mind, because it was Boots Popburger, and that was a big deal, major league pitcher getting knocked out by a semi-pro team in Gaplin. I can see it today. I can see him. They hit him so bad he actually walked off the mound himself, went over to the dugout. I can remember seeing him taking his spikes off, put his shoes on, walking out across the old creek, across the road, and going over and sitting on what was then a railroad sort of sidetrack that was still there at Gaplin for the rest of the game. And sure enough, this guy said, yes, And I remember his grandmother used to sit on the porch over there. He said, yes, she was sitting out on the porch one day. She wondered why that guy was sitting on the railroad track in a baseball uniform. And but then I talked to other people later too that had Boots had done the same thing at other games. If he was off and they were hitting him, instead of waiting for the manager to take him out, he'd walk off himself. Mm-hmm. And some guy said, yeah, he did that someplace else. So. But those type things from memory are different than I read something about the Antietam Ironworks or something about Hagerstown. May not know the source, but yeah, I remember reading it, and this is the way I remember reading what I read. Mm-hmm. And so that type thing you got to prove, I think. And I just never, I got enough of writing when I wrote for the newspaper. I really did. It was a job.
And you were writing on racing news?
Auto racing, which people absolutely can't believe I did.
Yeah.
But
I have a hard time with that.
Well, it wasn't so that I was a great fan, but no one else was doing it. Mm. And so it was a position where I could excel in because I had no competition. I was the only one doing it, so everybody would read what I wrote. At that time, national television wasn't even covering the big race like NASCAR. So the only time people could find out what Richard Petty was doing would be when I wrote it. So it put me in a unique position. And then I could draw money from it, not much. But back when I was making $5,000 a year, any place that I could work where I could draw money, I did, including here. And so that it was a way that I finished my basement. Yeah, and raised a family. So it wasn't one of those things like baseball where I like to watch games because I love baseball. It was a job, and it was hard work. Midnight out at the Speedway, I'm sitting there with a typewriter, typing on whatever you used to call it for mimeograph on a mimeograph sheet to put on a mimeograph machine. So everything I typed had to be right, had to be perfect. I had to make sure that I didn't make mistakes, because not like computer where you just back up and redo it. Mm-hmm. It was tough. I have no idea how I did it. I really don't. So at midnight, I'm typing up a release, which I need to get to the paper if I wanted to get it in for Monday morning, what we ran on Sunday night. So I had set up with the sports department here, how we do it and how we do it. Many times at 1 o'clock in the morning, I was over there, Old Herald Mail, bringing in press releases. If I got there before 1:15, they can make a Monday morning paper. And a lot of pressure. Mm-hmm. I bought all their advertising, and then the darn outfit I worked for wouldn't pay the bills, so I got all the graft from, when you gonna pay my bill? When you gonna pay me for this advertising? It was tough work. So I think maybe that's one reason why I don't enjoy writing. I've had a lot of, like you've been all over the place, so you know what it is to be all over. You've been all over the world practically, where I haven't. But I'm not waving at you. So to have an opportunity to have these experiences has been great. I mean, I talked to Richard Petty like I'm talking to you. Cale Yarborough, a lot of the big Fireball Roberts, and a lot of the big stars of the year. In fact, I talked to Richard's daddy, Lee Petty, who was pioneer in auto racing, and A.J. Foyt. talked to A.J. Foot and took his picture beside of his car. I've ridden around Daytona at high speeds. I mean, how many people have done that? And but to me, it was a job.
So who have you met in the history line?
History, I guess because I had school, good history teachers. I had good history teachers in middle school, early high school, that made me interested in history. Plus, as I say, I was basically, I can't say I was raised, but I spent my young life with my grandparents, their history. Today, my grandchildren never even talk to me, but I did. And my granddad talking about just various things. I remember one time he told me, he said the first president I was ever involved with was McKinley. Well, you think you go back in history. And of course, McKinley was one of the presidents who were assassinated also. But he said, when I was young, teenager, I wore my McKinley pin or whatever. McKinley was the first president where they actually came out with these pins. In fact, we have one here, I think. But he just talked like that, and then, of course, the old glorified horse and buggy days to them were fascinating to me, and I saw some of it. I don't remember. I don't think I ever rode in a carriage. I don't believe. But my granddad and grandmother, they didn't have electricity. Of course, they had no indoor plumbing, no telephone. So I was raised in that era, which was no different from the 1800s. And then to hear them talking about what happened. But basically, if you find somebody who will say, I hate history, did you have a good history teacher? No, I hated my history teacher. So I had great history teachers. In fact, I had good teachers all the way through. But you'll get people that excel in English or math, and they had good teachers. That now you didn't have a teacher to teach you internet because they didn't know what it was, but still, if you look back somewhere in your early education, you had a teacher or teachers that influenced the way your life did go. And I had an excellent history teacher. I still remember dates that he taught me in the 7th grade. But we talked about like the Spanish Armada and all kinds of things, because we did a lot of colonial history, so we got a lot of English history. And in fact, he told us one time when we were getting ready to study, I think the Revolution or the French-Indian War, I don't know which, he said, now I can tell you guys that you're going to be for the underdog. Said the American people are always for the one that's getting beat. So he said you're going to be rooting for the British, even though. But that was the type teacher he was. But he knew how to make history live, but he also knew how to make the class interested. And so that kind of created my interest in history. So.
And because of history, you've met all sorts of interesting people, like the folks that you've dealt with on the canal, the Shepherdstown running group that you.
Yeah, well, there again too. When I was involved in historical preservation, like the canal, fighting the power line, we were still small. And you basically couldn't make a difference. It's just like if that bridge we were talking about yesterday, if they were going to tear that bridge down in the 1960s, they wouldn't tear it down. we could put enough pressure on various positions, legislation, individuals, even the governor, that they wouldn't tear that bridge down. Today, it's hard to do because we're so much larger, and with the internet world where things change in a minute, you're not at that slow pace. So what we did, for instance, a couple of us in Williamsport, to save that canal, a couple of us together to, and a little bit later, people like Dennis and Tom Clemens, to save Antietam. It's pretty hard to do now, unless you have money. If you have money, you go buy it, you can save it. But that's so the period is different now. A dollar was worth a dollar back in 1950s and 1960s, and that makes a big difference. Plus the just great expansion of the population since the 50s and 60s, worldwide, not just nationwide, made a big difference in how you can affect. And so yeah, I mean, on those Douglas walks in the late 50s, you'd have United States senators, cabinet members. I mean, I walked with Stu Udall, Senator Paul Douglas. One time it was pouring down rain, and we were walking down the Great Falls area. I walked for a couple hours with Senator Paul Douglas of Illinois, just walking along talking like we're talking. They were just average people. They didn't look at their positions like these darn politicians today to think they're sacred. It was a job like we are doing, that they happen to be elected to do. So things have changed there in a lot of respects, unfortunately. I don't think for the better, because there's too much, and we shared a lot more back then. In some cases you had to. When I was growing up, some family up the road would send their older kids, as they got out of them, clothes down to mom. We'd wear them. If we didn't wear them out, we'd send them down the road to some other kids to wear. And you just shared everything. You bought your eggs next door. You bought your milk next door. You were lucky to get a banana. I mean, that was something. So things have changed so much that in a lot of cases the individual, whereas back then, myself as an individual could make a difference. Today it's really hard. Now if you're in a position like I am here, which you've built yourself into, but from the standpoint of, say, walking out of high school, which I did, or walking out of college, which most people do now, and instantly be able to make a difference, you can't do it unless you're awfully lucky, invent something, or you're great in medical or something. But you really, and even if you do, you're still part of a conglomerate. And that's one thing I've never tried to lose, is even though we are sort of independent here, we're still part of a team here. And so you're not isolated, you're not by yourself. And it's just pretty good philosophy. But I never felt that I was doing anything specifically for myself. Now I admit most of the things that I have done, I have received some kind of pay. I needed it. I tell you the truth, I needed it. It wasn't one of those things where, and so, but yeah, you're right to fraternize and rub elbows with people of influence. Today you can't do it. Shucks, when I first went to work for the state, if I wanted to talk to anybody on the governor's cabinet, say in DNR or somewhere, you call on the phone, a lot of times they'd answer the phone. The governor didn't have 15 people with him when he went out to protect him. He usually had a chauffeur, or may not have had a gun. When Talls and McKeldin and even Agnew and all his problems were governor, it wasn't a hierarchy thing. It's all changed, unfortunately. DeWitt Hyde and of course Widow Barron and Bell from Western Maryland, from Cumberland. I called down there with my name, and if I didn't get them, I got the next person. And because they knew if I wasn't going to bother them except if it was important. It was kind of nice to know people like that, and people knew you like that. I don't know, I may have told you this one time. I was invited to Mount Vernon to a session of the old ladies that run Mount Vernon to protect the other shore across the river, because they were going to put a casino or something in there, or a big amusement park. I don't know what it was, but something that would really affect the viewpoint of Mount Vernon. And so they had all these people come in, and Bernie Hillenbrand, who was the executive director of the National Association of Counties, he and I had worked together on fighting that power line. So he called me and said, "I need a Western Maryland representative. I want you to come down." I said, "Well, I want to drive down." "Oh, you meet me somewhere and I'll drive in." So here I am, seated at a table, George Washington's table, in Mount Vernon, being served a lunch. All these wheels all the way around. And Senator Mathias was there. Well, I had worked for Mathias back when he ran for Congress, his first time, before he was a senator. Knew him personally, had talked to him like we're talking. So, but he had seen me for at least 10 years or longer. And I didn't talk to him ahead of time. But when he got up, the first thing he said was, "I'm glad to see somebody here from Western Maryland. Glad to see John Frye. How in the world that son of a gun remember me like that?" That kind of thing is gratifying, but didn't make me feel great. But it was gratifying to know that this United States Senator remembered me when I was a little guy. Hi, John. When I was a little guy, trying to help him get elected to Congress. So to be on first name basis with people like that, like with Lem Kirk was county commissioner, I happened to buy a car from him. If I went up to get it worked on, he'd see me in the office waiting. "Just stay around, I'll take you to lunch." He would take me out, buy my lunch, and nothing to do with politics, nothing to do with what he may want or something, just out of strictly knowing and friendship. So that was an era that you can't repeat today. Shoot, you can't really get an opportunity to talk to these darn 5 commissioners today we have. They're above reproach almost. Every time Terry Baker sees me, he says, "Well, how's Jennison?" That's about all I get out of you. But I lived through an era that will be impossible for anybody to have jumped around and been around and walk in. Like, why in the world would Ed Hall come out that day while we were putting up those exhibits and say, do you happen to know anybody that might spend a Saturday afternoon in the Western Mail Room so we can keep it open? And I happen to be me. It's just one of those, be at the right place at the right time. And it does work. Dennis has had some of those experiences. A couple of years ago, he said, you know who I just talked to? I said, I have no idea. He said, I didn't know he was there, but he said, I was lecturing to a group. And this guy comes up and he extends his hand. He said, I'm Buzz Aldrin. I said, you're kidding. No, he said, he come up and introduced himself. He said, man, to talk to the guy and walked on the moon is, and he just happened to be at the right place at the right time. So it does still happen somewhat. But yeah, he said, and he said, then he said he just average guy. Well, sure. We were all just average people. Anyway, I appreciate the interest.
You are an interesting guy, John.
Through to make the park and my interest in canals. I had no idea I'd ever work on a canal. I had no idea, but in the late 70s, there was no one that knew anything about the canal in the area, in the Park Service. Somehow or other, they got a wind of me. So they called me and wanted to know if I would take a special position to spend 3 weeks with their team that was going up the canal to decide what to do with it. Because they had no one that knew the history. So I said, yeah. I said, I'll take off work and do that. And so I called my boss that I worked for at the state. Well, he said, no. He said, we'll loan you to him. I said, you don't have to take off work. And so from that, I met the guy that was in charge of that team, who then became the director of interpretation for the canal. And he said one day, he said, if you'll work weekends, I'll hire you. You can be a ranger. Well, there it was. And back then, they could do that. Today, you got to jump through hoops and swim rivers and walk across the ocean to get in the Park Service. But back then, they could do that. A couple of weeks, I had a uniform. I was out on towpath. And then when I retired, the ranger I was working for, I called him and I said, I'll be available more than now just weekends if you want to use me. He said, what do you mean? I said, well, I've retired. I said, I'll give up my... He said, next Monday, report to work. So he put me on full time for their summer positions. And so here I am playing ranger. And that's what we did. We didn't have responsibilities that the full-time people had. Got to do it for 15 years. Only paid $6 an hour, but it was a lot of fun.
And you got the hat. Did you get the hat?
Oh, yeah, the ranger hat.
Oh, yeah.
Oh, my gosh, yes. Yeah. We got the full uniform. In fact, I had saved up my allowance, and I had a full Park Service Class A uniform, which is the Ike jacket, and you put the little NPS on the collars, and I had a full. Most of the full-time rangers didn't have a Class A uniform, so if I went to a real special event, I could wear a Class A uniform just like the director of the Park Service. And yep, I had my hat, both winter and summer. And believe it or not, they made us quit, but they had a ball cap that had an NPS on. And of course, we love to wear those in the field because those darn hats are a pain in the neck anyway. And so we wear the ball caps, even though we could wear the But they finally made us wear the Class A hats. Both winter, it's a straw hat in the summer and then a felt winter hat. We had to wear them anytime we were in the field. But yep, I have hats. And
All right.
but I don't know how much longer I'm going to come in. I've been thinking about finally giving it up. It's tough to get in here. Once I get in here, though, all I have to do is sit here and get paid. So